The wind outside rattled the bare branches against the kitchen window, a dry scratching that matched the rhythm of Claire Whitmore's unsteady hands. She stood over the stovetop, stirring a pot of soup she barely tasted, her mind elsewhere. The house felt too quiet, almost staged, as though silence had been draped across the rooms like heavy curtains. She tightened her grip on the wooden spoon. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a restless unease that had settled deep in her chest. Lately, even the simplest moments in her home carried a kind of static charge, as though something waited in the shadows, unspoken but undeniable. The clock on the wall ticked past 7. Daniel was late again. She set the spoon down, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and let her eyes wander around the kitchen. The overhead light flickered once before holding steady, washing the room in a pale glow. Everything looked normal. The polished oak table, the neat stack of bills in the corner, the faint smell of bread warming in the oven. Yet the normalcy itself felt suspicious, like a photograph arranged to hide the truth behind it. When the front door finally clicked open, Claire froze. Footsteps crossed the hardwood floor with a casual weight that used to comfort her. Now, each thud landed heavy, almost accusatory. Daniel entered the kitchen, shaking the cold from his shoulders. His hair was damp with melted snow, his tie crooked, his expression unreadable. "You're late," Claire said softly, not looking at him. "Traffic," he answered quickly, loosening his tie. "There was an accident on the interstate." His voice carried the easy tone of someone used to deflecting. For years she had let those tones soothe her, but tonight they scraped against her skin. She turned off the stove and ladled soup into bowls. The steam rose between them, creating a thin veil as he sat across the table. He smiled faintly, almost dutifully, as though dinner itself was a performance to be endured. "You okay?" Daniel asked after a pause. "Fine," Claire replied, but her voice faltered. He studied her for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "You look tired." She wanted to snap back, to tell him that exhaustion wasn't the same as unease, that tiredness didn't explain why her hands shook when she picked up the ladle. Instead, she forced another smile, one that mirrored his. The silence stretched. Only the clinking of spoons against bowls filled the air. Claire let her eyes drift to Daniel's briefcase, resting against the counter. He hadn't even tried to hide it this time, hadn't carried it straight to his office as usual. Something about the way it slouched against the cabinet door, half unzipped, gnawed at her. She looked away before he noticed. The soup was warm but flavorless. She chewed slowly, her thoughts louder than the meal. She remembered when dinner used to be filled with laughter, when Evan was younger, when Daniel's stories from work carried energy instead of exhaustion. Those days seemed rehearsed now, like memories edited to fit a narrative that had already begun unraveling. "You're really quiet tonight," Daniel said, breaking the stillness. Claire hesitated. "Just a long day." He nodded, though his eyes darted briefly toward the briefcase. The motion was subtle, but Claire caught it. Something tightened in her chest. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling against the windows. The house groaned in protest, as though it too carried a secret it could no longer hold. Claire finished her meal without tasting the last few bites. When she rose to clear the dishes, Daniel reached out, his hand brushing hers. The contact startled her. His touch felt both familiar and distant, like a stranger imitating intimacy. She pulled away too quickly. "I'll wash up." Daniel said nothing, only leaned back in his chair with a sigh. As Claire stood at the sink, the warm water running over her trembling hands, her gaze returned to that briefcase on the counter. The zipper gleamed faintly under the kitchen light, half open, beckoning. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder what might be inside. And with that single thought, the uneasy quiet of the house sharpened into something darker. Tomorrow, she promised herself she would look. The next morning, sunlight pressed weakly through the blinds, painting pale stripes across the living room floor. Claire moved quietly, careful not to wake Daniel upstairs. He had left his briefcase on the counter again, as though daring her to open it. Her chest tightened as she approached it. The zipper resisted slightly, then gave way with a small hiss. Inside, folders lay stacked in careful order, every label neat in Daniel's handwriting. At first, they seemed ordinary. Tax records, bank statements, contracts from his job. But then, beneath the layers, her hand brushed an envelope thick with folded papers. She slid it out. The name on the front made her throat constrict. Evan Whitmore. Her son's name, written in cold black print. Claire lowered herself onto the sofa, legs trembling. She peeled the envelope open. Adoption papers stared back at her. Official seals, signatures, dates. Words swam on the page. Petition for adoption. Finalized. Confidential. And then, a date nearly 15 years ago. Her mind scrambled to connect the fragments. Evan had been born to her. She remembered the labor, the hospital room, the weight of him against her chest. None of this made sense. Her breath came shallow and fast. From upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Claire stuffed the envelope back into the briefcase, her fingers clumsy with panic. She zipped it closed just as Daniel's footsteps began descending the stairs. "Morning," he said casually, stepping into the kitchen. Claire forced a smile. "Morning." He reached for the coffee pot, filling his mug, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Sleep all right?" he asked. "Yeah." The lie scratched her throat. He studied her for a moment, then shrugged, sipping his coffee. Claire turned to the sink, hiding her face. The taste of fear was bitter in her mouth. All through breakfast, the envelope burned in her thoughts. Every glance at Daniel felt like staring into the eyes of a stranger. She wondered if he knew she'd seen it. His calmness could have been genuine or calculated. After he left for work, Claire sat at the table again, the silence crushing. She spread the papers across the wood, hands shaking. The details were precise, legal, undeniable. Someone, Daniel, had signed in places she had never seen. She whispered the words aloud, barely breathing. "Why would you hide this?" The pages offered no answer, only the cold authority of ink and seal. Her eyes blurred with tears. The man she had trusted with her life had built it on a secret so vast it shattered the foundation of their family. Evan, her sweet, awkward teenage son, was at the center of it, and he had no idea. Claire pressed the papers back into the envelope, sliding it beneath a cushion on the couch. The evidence felt radioactive, dangerous to even touch. She would have to confront Daniel, but when and how? The clock ticked louder than usual, each second an accusation. By the time Evan wandered downstairs after school, tossing his backpack by the door, Claire had rehearsed her smile again. She asked about his classes, nodded at his stories, all the while clutching the secret inside her chest like a blade. As night fell, Claire lingered at the window, watching headlights blur across the street. Her reflection stared back at her, pale, hollow-eyed, a woman holding too many questions. Daniel's car pulled into the driveway, her pulse spiked. Tomorrow, she decided, she would probe, carefully, casually, just enough to see if he flinched. And in that quiet resolve, suspicion hardened into something far more dangerous. Dinner the next evening unfolded under the weight of Claire's secret. She ladled stew into bowls, her movements mechanical, every sound amplified. The scrape of the spoon, the clink of silverware, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Evan chatted about a history project, his voice light and youthful, completely unaware of the storm building inside his mother. Claire nodded in the right places, but her mind was locked on the papers she had hidden beneath the couch cushion. Daniel sat across the table, smiling faintly at his son's stories. To anyone else, the smile would have looked warm, paternal. To Claire, it looked strained, like a mask stretched too tightly across his face. Her heart thudded. She needed to test him. "So," she began, her tone as casual as she could manage. "Do you remember Evan's first checkup? The one when the nurse kept mixing up his file?" Daniel looked up from his bowl, his expression smooth. "Of course. You were so worried, but it was nothing." Claire's fingers clenched around her spoon. "It's strange, though. I remember there were gaps, papers missing." His smile faltered for the briefest second, barely perceptible. "Hospitals lose things all the time. Bureaucracy." Evan glanced between them, sensing tension. "Are you guys fighting about old doctor visits?" "That's weird." Claire forced a laugh. "No, honey, just remembering." But inside, her pulse spiked. She had seen it. The slip in Daniel's smile, the twitch of unease. As Evan excused himself to grab dessert from the fridge, Claire leaned slightly forward, her voice low. "You always seem to have an answer ready." Daniel's eyes met hers, cool and unwavering. "That's what being a husband is, Claire. Having answers." She swallowed hard, her spoon slipping back into her bowl with a faint splash. Something cold spread through her stomach. The man across from her, the man she had built her life with, was performing, rehearsing, hiding. When Evan returned with ice cream, The conversation shifted. Daniel asked about his grades. Claire smiled at the right moments, and the house filled with the sounds of an ordinary family. But Claire felt every word sharpen against her like a blade. Later that night, after Evan went upstairs, Daniel leaned against the counter, sipping from a glass of water. "You've been acting strange," he said softly. Claire dried her hands on a towel. "Strange how?" "You're watching me, waiting for me to say the wrong thing." His voice was calm, but the accusation lingered underneath. Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to hurl the envelope at him and demand the truth. Instead, she said, "Maybe I just notice more than I used to." His smile returned, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe you should stop looking so hard." The words chilled her more than any confession could have. When he finally went upstairs, Claire lingered at the sink, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Her hands trembled, not just from fear, but from certainty. Daniel was hiding something enormous, and he would never give it freely. She pressed the towel to her mouth to muffle a sob. The cracks in his smile were real, and once seen, they could never be unseen. Tomorrow, she decided, she needed someone else to confirm what she already feared. By Saturday afternoon, Claire could no longer carry the weight alone. The envelope sat buried beneath a stack of folded blankets in the linen closet, but its presence haunted her every step through the house. Each time Daniel brushed past her, each time Evan asked an innocent question, the secret pressed harder against her ribs. She needed to confide in someone she trusted. Marissa Harper had been her friend since high school. Steady, blunt, the kind of woman who never flinched at uncomfortable truths. Claire drove to Marissa's small ranch house on the edge of town, her knuckles white around the steering wheel. The smell of coffee greeted her the moment she stepped inside. Marissa, with her wild curls and sharp eyes, ushered her to the couch. "You look like hell," Marissa said plainly, settling beside her. "What's going on?" Claire hesitated, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "It's Daniel," Marissa's brow furrowed. "What about him?" For a moment, words failed. Claire pulled the envelope from her purse, her hands trembling. She laid it on the coffee table like evidence in a trial. Marissa's eyes narrowed. "What is this?" "Open it." Marissa flipped through the papers, her jaw tightening as she read. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she exhaled. "Jesus, Claire. I found it in his briefcase," Claire interrupted, her voice cracking. "Adoption papers. For Evan. Papers I never signed, never even saw." Marissa's face paled. She pressed her fingers to her temples, shaking her head. I didn't think it was real." Claire's chest seized. "Didn't think what was real?" Marissa looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "Years ago, Daniel got drunk at my place after one of your fights. He said something about how things weren't what they seemed with Evan. I thought it was just him being dramatic, venting about stress. I never imagined—" "You knew," Claire said, her voice sharp with betrayal. "No, Claire, I swear. I didn't know. I didn't ask questions because it sounded insane. And he swore me to silence." Claire's pulse roared in her ears. "You let me live like this, believing everything was normal?" Marissa's eyes welled with guilt. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought he was just talking nonsense. If I'd known—" The air between them crackled with raw hurt. Claire stood abruptly, pacing across the living room. Her hands shook as she pressed them against her mouth. "Daniel lied to me," she whispered. "For years. About our own son." Marissa rose slowly, placing a tentative hand on Claire's arm. "You have to be careful. If he kept something this big from you, what else is he hiding?" Claire's breath hitched. "I don't even know who I'm married to anymore." Marissa's eyes hardened. "Then maybe it's time you find out." Claire looked down at the envelope again, its edges already worn from her restless handling. The papers didn't just reveal a secret. They detonated everything she thought was solid in her life. When she finally left Marissa's house, dusk was settling over the neighborhood. The air felt colder, sharper, like it was warning her. As she pulled into her driveway, the sight of Daniel's car, parked neatly in its spot, twisted her stomach into knots. She carried the envelope inside, her heart pounding with the weight of betrayal. The living room lights glowed warmly, deceptively ordinary, as though nothing at all had changed. But Claire knew better. The portrait of her family was cracking, and soon it would shatter. That night, the house felt different to Claire, like a stage set after the actors had gone home, hollow and too quiet. She wandered the living room, her eyes lingering on the photographs lining the walls. Smiling faces, birthday candles, Christmas mornings, moments she had always trusted as proof of a happy life. Now every image looked staged, her gaze fixed on one photo in particular. Evan at 6 years old, holding Daniel's hand at a county fair. Claire remembered that day vividly, or at least she thought she did. Evan had been sick the week before, and she'd tried to fill out paperwork at the pediatrician's office. Daniel had taken the forms from her, saying he'd handle them. She hadn't thought twice at the time. But tonight, the memory curdled. Claire touched the frame, her fingers trembling. Was this all a performance? She whispered. From upstairs, she could hear the faint sound of Evan's video game, muffled laughter spilling through the closed door. The sound both comforted and tormented her. He was innocent in all this, yet his whole life had been built on a lie. She turned back to the shelf of albums. One by one, she pulled them down. Birthdays, school plays, vacations, and scattered throughout were more moments when Daniel had been the one holding the papers, the one signing the forms, the one stepping in before she could ask questions. The pattern emerged like cracks spreading across glass. Claire sank onto the couch with the album in her lap. She remembered trying to apply for Evan's passport years ago, how Daniel had snapped that the process was too complicated and convinced her to drop it. At the time, she thought he was being controlling, maybe even protective. Now she saw it for what it was, concealment. Her stomach twisted. If he had gone this far to hide Evan's adoption, what else had he buried beneath his smile? She flipped through another album until her eyes landed on a hospital photo. Her lying in bed, exhausted, Evan wrapped in a blanket beside her. Daniel had taken the picture. She studied her own face in it. Pale, weary, but certain of one thing. She had given birth to that child. So why did the papers claim otherwise? Claire's throat closed. Either the system had been manipulated, or her memory was betraying her. Both possibilities chilled her to the bone. The front door creaked open. Daniel's voice carried faintly into the hall as he spoke into his phone. Claire slammed the album shut and shoved it beneath the couch cushion, her pulse racing. When he entered the living room, his tie loose, his smile automatic, she forced herself to stand. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, tilting his head. Claire nodded quickly, too quickly. "Just looking through old pictures." He chuckled softly, setting his keys down. "Nostalgia can be dangerous." His words lingered in the air long after he climbed the stairs. Claire stood frozen, her hand pressed to the hidden album, the echo of his voice gnawing at her. Tomorrow, she realized, she couldn't keep the truth from Evan any longer. Sunday morning crept in slowly, the house filled with the muted light of an overcast sky. Claire lingered in the kitchen, staring at the steam rising from her untouched coffee. The photographs, the files, the memories that no longer aligned, they swirled in her mind like storm clouds gathering before a break. She could no longer keep Evan shielded. He deserved to know, but when she climbed the stairs to his room, she froze at the door. Music pulsed faintly from inside, layered with the muffled sounds of a video game. Evan's laughter, carefree and unburdened, drifted through the cracks. Claire pressed her forehead against the doorframe, paralyzed by the weight of what she was about to do. Inside, she heard him call to a friend through his headset, his voice light and joking. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine he would stay this way forever, untouched by secrets, unscarred by betrayal. Then guilt crushed her, and she knocked softly. "Yeah?" Evan called. She pushed the door open. His room smelled of chips and laundry detergent. The clutter of a teenage boy scattered across the floor. Evan pulled off his headset and looked up at her, his expression curious. "What's up, Mom? You look weird." Claire forced a smile, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Just wanted to check on you. You've seemed, I don't know, older lately." He rolled his eyes. "That's what happens when you're 16. She tried to laugh, but the sound came out brittle. For a moment, she just watched him, memorizing the way his hair curled messily over his forehead, the way his hands fidgeted with a controller. How much of him was hers? How much had been hidden? "Evan," she began, her voice catching, "do you ever feel like your dad keeps things from us?" Evan frowned. "What do you mean? Like secrets about paperwork or about the past?" He tilted his head, studying her. "You're being cryptic, Mom. Is this about you guys fighting again?" Claire shook her head quickly. "It's not about fighting. It's about truth. About who we are as a family." He gave a nervous laugh. "You're scaring me. Did Dad cheat or something?" The question pierced her chest. She reached out, brushing his hair back gently. No, not that. It's just, sometimes people make choices they think are protecting us. But those choices can hurt too. Evan's eyes narrowed. What are you not telling me? Her throat burned. She wanted to spill everything, to show him the papers, to prove that his life had been twisted by lies. But when she opened her mouth, no words came. His face, so fragile in its innocence, held her back. Nothing you need to worry about yet, she whispered instead. Evan leaned away, suspicion creeping into his features. Why do I feel like you're hiding something huge? Claire stood abruptly, forcing a smile. Because you're too smart for your own good. Now come down later for dinner, okay? He didn't answer, only watched her as she slipped out the door. Back in the hallway, Claire pressed her hands to her face. She had failed him, failed to say what mattered. But maybe tonight, when the house was quiet, she could confront Daniel again. Maybe the truth would finally come out in the open. Downstairs, she heard the front door unlock. Daniel's voice filled the house, cheerful and practiced. Claire's stomach tightened. Tonight, the confrontation would not be avoided. Late that night, the house had settled into its quiet rhythm. Evan was upstairs, music faint through the walls, his laughter muffled by closed doors. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, a heartbeat Claire could no longer ignore. She stood by the counter, hands gripping the edge, eyes fixed on the knife block. The air smelled of leftover stew and dish soap, ordinary scents that felt suffocating against the storm brewing inside her. Daniel entered casually, tie loosened, his phone in hand. He glanced up at her, offering the same tired smile he had given 1,000 times before. You're still awake? Claire's voice was low. We need to talk. He set his phone down, wary now. About what? Her breath hitched. About Evan. For the first time, his mask faltered. What about him? I found the papers, she said, each word deliberate. The adoption papers. In your briefcase. Daniel froze, eyes narrowing. Silence pressed between them, thick and unbearable. Then, slowly, he exhaled, the smile returning, weaker this time. You weren't supposed to see those. Claire's chest tightened. You lied to me. All these years you lied about our son. His tone sharpened. I didn't lie. I protected you, protected us. Do you have any idea what it would have done to you to know the truth back then? Her hands trembled. The truth. You stole it from me. You stole my choice, my right to know. I saved you from heartbreak, he snapped, stepping closer. You were fragile, Claire. You couldn't handle what really happened. Her breath came ragged, fury and grief colliding. Don't you dare call me fragile. I gave birth to him. I remember. You can't erase that, Daniel's jaw tightened. Memory is unreliable. Documents aren't. Something inside her cracked. The world tilted. She saw his calm face, his controlled tone, the way he wielded words like shackles. Every year, every smile, every night they'd shared had been curated by him, shaped by his decisions, not hers. You've been playing God, she whispered, and you expect me to thank you. He reached for her arm, his grip firm, controlling. I expect you to accept reality, for Evan's sake. If you love him, don't, she cut in, her voice breaking. Don't use his name like a weapon. The kitchen light buzzed overhead. Her eyes flicked to the knife block, the steel glinting under the bulb. Her pulse thundered. Daniel lowered his voice, calm again, coaxing. We can keep this between us. He never has to know. We move forward like nothing happened. Families survive worse. Claire shook her head, tears spilling freely now. I can't unsee it. I can't unknow it. His grip tightened. Then you'll ruin him. You'll destroy everything we built. In that moment, she saw it clearly. The manipulation, the control, the years of silence she had mistaken for safety. He hadn't built a family. He had built a cage. Her hand moved before her mind could catch it. Fingers curled around the wooden handle, the weight of the knife suddenly alive in her grasp. Daniel's eyes widened, shock breaking through his mask. Claire, put it down. Her body shook violently. You already took everything from me. He stepped back, hands raised now, voice firm but edged with fear. Think about Evan. Think about what this will do to him. But the words no longer tethered her. They drifted past empty. All that remained was the roar of betrayal, the years of silence collapsing into a single, unbearable moment. With a choked sob, Claire lunged. The knife found flesh. The sound was sickening, sharp, final. Daniel gasped, staggered, his hands clutching at her shoulders as though begging for an undoing that could never come. Blood bloomed across his shirt, dripping onto the tiles, each drop echoing louder than the clock's ticking. Claire's breath tore from her lungs, ragged and wild, as Daniel collapsed against the counter, sliding down in slow defeat, his eyes, wide with disbelief, fixed on her one last time before rolling back. The knife clattered from her trembling hand. Upstairs, a door creaked open. Evan's voice carried faintly down the hall, cautious, uncertain. "Mom, Dad, what's going on?" Claire staggered back, staring at the crimson pooling on the floor. The quiet house no longer felt like home. It felt like a crime scene, and the footsteps approaching would bring the truth crashing into the open. The kitchen was thick with the copper smell of blood, sharp and suffocating. Claire stood frozen, her breath ragged, hands shaking violently as the knife lay abandoned on the floor. Daniel's body slumped sideways, his shirt soaked through, the red spreading fast across the white tiles. The ticking of the clock seemed louder than her heartbeat. "Mom?" Evan's voice came again, closer this time, heavy with confusion. She turned just as he appeared in the doorway. His eyes widened at the sight before him. His father gasping on the floor, his mother standing above with blood on her trembling hands. For a heartbeat, the world held still, broken only by Daniel's wet, gurgling breaths. Evan's voice cracked. What did you do?" Claire reached for him instinctively, her words stumbling. "Evan, listen to me. He lied to us. He's been hiding everything. I had to—" "No." Evan backed against the door frame, his face pale. "Dad's bleeding." "We need to call someone." Daniel coughed, a spray of blood flecking his lips. His eyes darted weakly toward Evan, then back at Claire, full of disbelief, of betrayal, of something that would never be spoken. Claire fell to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the wound, though the blood slipped hot and relentless between her fingers. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Don't you dare leave me like this." Daniel's lips moved, but only a faint rasp came. His eyes fluttered, then began to dim. "Call 911, Claire shouted at Evan, desperate now. Her son's hands shook as he fumbled for his phone, his voice high and panicked as he dialed. Claire couldn't hear the operator's questions, only Evan's broken words. "My dad. He's been stabbed. My mum. She—" His voice cracked, dissolving into sobs. Claire pressed harder on the wound, tears streaking down her face. "You did this to us," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant Daniel or herself. "You made me." The kitchen seemed to shrink around them, every surface echoing with the reality of what had happened. The bright overhead light was merciless, casting everything in sharp, unforgiving detail. The glint of the knife on the floor, the spreading pool of red, the wide eyes of her son frozen in shock. Daniel gave one last shallow gasp, then went still, his head lolled to the side, his eyes glassy and fixed on nothing. Claire let out a guttural cry, half grief, half rage, her hand slipping from his chest. Evan dropped the phone, the operator still shouting faintly from the speaker. He stared at his father's body, then at his mother, horror written across his young face. "Why?" he whispered. Claire turned to him, reaching out, but her blood-soaked hands made him recoil. "Because he lied to us," she said, her voice shaking. "He lied about you, about everything. He wasn't who we thought he was." Evan shook his head violently, tears blurring his vision. "That doesn't mean you kill him." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder, closer. Claire's body trembled as the sound pierced the silence. She wanted to hold her son, to make him understand, but the space between them had widened into something irreparable. She sank back against the counter, her hands slick with blood, her mind unraveling. The sirens screamed louder until flashing red and blue lights spilled through the window, painting the kitchen walls in harsh colors. Evan stood rooted to the spot, staring at her, as though she were no longer his mother, but a stranger who had invaded their home. Claire closed her eyes, the sound of boots pounding up the porch steps sealing the fate she could no longer outrun. The front door burst open, and uniformed officers spilled into the kitchen, their flashlights cutting through the dim, blood-streaked room. Claire's hands were still trembling, pressed against her knees as she sank onto the floor. Evan hovered at the doorway, eyes wide, frozen between panic and disbelief. "Ma'am?" "Step away from the body," one officer ordered firmly, his voice slicing through the haze of adrenaline. Claire looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. It's too late." The officer knelt beside Daniel, checking for a pulse. He shook his head. "Sir's gone. Ma'am, we need you to stay calm and answer questions." Evan's sobs broke the tense silence, echoing off the kitchen walls. "Mum, why? Why did you do this?" Claire's gaze met his, and she felt the raw weight of his words press into her chest. I didn't know what else to do," she said, voice cracking. "He kept everything from us. I thought maybe if I acted, I could—" "You acted? You stabbed him? He's dead!" Evan shouted, terror and hurt mingling in his tone. "I know," she yelled back, the words ragged and desperate. "I know, Evan. I know it's wrong." The officers guided Evan to a chair against the wall, wrapping a blanket around his shaking shoulders. Claire sank further, burying her face in her hands, listening to the cries of her son. Every sound was a dagger. One detective crouched in front of her. "Ma'am, we need the whole story. Everything that happened tonight." Claire nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. I found out about him. About Daniel hiding things about you. About your adoption. He never told me, and I lost control. I wasn't thinking, Her voice faltered. She looked at Evan, trying to convey something she didn't fully understand herself. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I couldn't bear it anymore." Evan's eyes were wide, his small frame shaking violently. "You could have just told me. You could have called someone." Claire's sobs filled the space between them. She wanted to reach for him, to explain, to beg for his forgiveness. But he recoiled slightly, unsure if the mother before him was still the same person he had known. An officer spoke quietly, gently to Evan. "Son, we'll make sure you're safe. We're going to take care of you now." Claire felt her heart shatter as he was led away, his eyes never leaving hers. Each step he took away from her was a reminder of what she had destroyed. Alone with the officers now, Claire recounted the events again and again. The stabbing, the confrontation, the years of deception. Every word weighed heavily on her soul, dragging her further into despair. The kitchen lights cast harsh reflections on the tiles, the knife now behind police tape. The room felt impossibly empty, though the echoes of screams and sobs lingered, a haunting reminder of the night's violence. Claire's thoughts circled endlessly. Daniel's lies, Evan's betrayal of trust, the irreversible act she had committed. She realized that truth, even when sought, came with a cost she had never imagined. And outside, sirens faded into the distance, leaving only the oppressive, suffocating silence of a family destroyed. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, humming against the cold sterility of the interrogation room. Claire sat on the hard plastic chair, her hands cuffed loosely in front of her, the metal cold against her skin. She felt exposed, stripped down to nothing but raw nerves and the weight of what she had done. The walls were blank, white, sterile, an empty canvas for her guilt to be projected onto. A detective entered, notebook in hand, eyes sharp and calculating. "Claire Whitmore," he said, voice neutral. "We're going to go over what happened last night. From the beginning." Claire swallowed, the dry tickle in her throat like sandpaper. I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "You can," he said, setting the notebook on the table. "I need you to. For Evan, for yourself. Start from the confrontation." Her fingers drummed nervously against the table. She could feel the events playing out behind her eyes like a film she didn't want to watch. The knife, the blood, Daniel's wide-eyed shock, Evan frozen in the doorway. It all came rushing back. "I confronted him," she began, her voice low. "About the adoption papers. I found them in his briefcase. Evan's, my son's. He had hidden them from me for years." The detective nodded slowly, pen poised. "Go on." Claire's breath caught. "I asked him why he didn't tell me, why he kept it a secret, and he said it was to protect me. That I couldn't handle it. She broke off, shaking her head. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't. All those years of lies, all those moments I thought were real." "You felt betrayed," the detective prompted gently. Claire's hands clenched. "Betrayed doesn't even cover it. I loved him. I trusted him. And he used that love, that trust, to manipulate me, to decide what I could handle. My son, Evan, I couldn't let him grow up surrounded by lies any longer. I thought if I acted, maybe it would stop. Maybe it would make things right." The detective leaned forward. "Acted how?" Her eyes filled with tears. I stabbed him." The words felt foreign, alien in her mouth. She had said them aloud in the kitchen. But here, in this sterile room, they rang with a finality that made her stomach twist. "And Evan?" the detective asked, voice steady but not unkind. "He saw it happen," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He was standing in the doorway. I didn't even think about him. I was consumed, he nodded. And when the officers arrived, Claire's hands shook. I tried to explain. I tried to make him understand that it wasn't just violence. It was years of lies, manipulation. That Daniel, that he had been hiding everything. But Evan, he just stared at me. I saw the fear in his eyes. He didn't know who I was anymore, and I couldn't fix it. The detective paused, letting the weight of her confession settle in the air. You've been holding a lot inside, Claire. I want to understand not just what you did, but why. Tell me about your life with Daniel before this. She let out a shuddering breath, staring at the table. At first, it was perfect, or as close to perfect as I thought I could get. We had Evan, we had a family, but small things started to feel off. Little lies, little manipulations. He'd redirect questions, control situations. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was imagining it. And the adoption papers. Claire's voice trembled. I never knew, not until I found them. And then all the moments made sense. The gaps, the forms he always took from me, the way he orchestrated everything. I realized I'd been living in a carefully constructed illusion. And Evan had no idea. He had no say. No one had told him the truth. Her eyes glazed as she remembered his young face in the doorway, wide-eyed, terrified. And I couldn't let that continue. I thought if I confronted Daniel, if I forced the truth to the surface, maybe I could protect Evan from learning it from someone else. Maybe I could save him from the lies. The detective made a small note, then asked, "And what about your emotions at that moment?" Right before the stabbing, Claire shuddered. It was rage, grief, betrayal, fear, all at once. I felt like my entire life had been stolen, and the person who should have protected me was the one who hurt me the most. I snapped. I didn't think rationally. I only knew that I could no longer live under the weight of his lies. And Daniel? Her eyes burned. He didn't flinch. He tried to manipulate me even in that moment, telling me I would ruin everything for Evan, that I was being irrational. And I lost it. The betrayal, the years of secrecy, all the manipulation, it exploded. And then it was over. The detective leaned back, letting her words hang in the air. Claire, I know this is difficult, but understanding your state of mind is crucial. I need you to walk me through the aftermath. Her voice shook as she recounted the sirens, Evan's sobs, the officers taking control, her son's horror. He was just a child. He didn't deserve any of it. I didn't consider him in the moment. I was overwhelmed. I couldn't stop the rage from taking over. And the guilt. I've been drowning in it ever since. You understand there are consequences, he said gently, almost as if speaking to a frightened child. Claire's head sank. I do, but understanding it doesn't make it easier. Knowing what I did, it doesn't erase the years of lies, or the terror in Evan's eyes, or the fact that I ended a life in a moment of fury. I wish I had another way. The detective nodded silently, giving her space. He could see the unraveling, how her mind circled endlessly around the betrayal, the lies, the impossibility of repair. One last thing, he said. Do you regret telling Evan anything at all before this? Claire's fingers trembled over the cuffs. I didn't tell him. Not fully. I couldn't. I was trying to protect him in a twisted way, but in the end, he saw it all anyway. He saw me as someone he couldn't recognize. And now, I don't know if he'll ever forgive me, or understand why. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the lights. Claire stared at the scratched table surface, her reflection blurred in the scratches like the life she once had. The weight of her confession pressed against her chest, every word leaving an imprint that she could not erase. The detective closed his notebook and looked at her steadily. Claire, we're done for now. We'll come back, but I need you to stay calm. Cooperate. It's the only way forward. Claire nodded numbly, her mind a whirl of Daniel's betrayal, Evan's terrified eyes, and the unending guilt that would haunt her forever. She was alone in the silence now, save for the memory of her son's face, a child caught between horror and love, suspended in the aftermath of the truth she had forced into the open. And somewhere, deep inside, Claire knew that the next confrontation, the one with Evan, would be even more painful. The truth had a cost, and she had just begun to pay it.